My name is Elena, and I am 32 years old. The first sound I heard after my daughter opened her birthday gift was not laughter. It was a chair scraping across the floor as she staggered backward. One hand pressed to her throat, the box slipped from her lap. A sweet, overpowering scent filled the room, and seconds later her knees gave out. Before I tell you how one hidden recording destroyed every excuse my mother gave, tell me what time it is where you are right now. I want to see how far this story travels. To understand how a 10-year-old girl ends up collapsing on her own living room floor, you have to look back 18 months. My mother, Brenda, was a disgraced wellness influencer. She had built a modest empire selling holistic cures and essential oil blends until the regulatory board started asking uncomfortable questions. Her response wasn't to pivot or apologize, it was to double down, claiming she was a victim of a medical conspiracy. And Maya, my daughter, became her ultimate project. Maya was diagnosed with severe asthma at age 6. We had a strict, expensive treatment plan managed by Dr. Ruiz. Brenda hated Dr. Ruiz. She hated the inhalers, the steroids, and the boundaries I set. For a year and a half, my mother relentlessly pressured us, sending articles, dropping off uninvited tinctures, and telling me I was raising a weak, fragile child by not letting her lungs toughen up through natural exposure. People often ask me why I didn't just cut contact right then. Why did I let her into my home for 18 months if I knew she was toxic? It is a fair question, and the answer is the trap of cruel normalization. When you grow up with a parent whose toxicity is a slow, steady drip rather than a sudden explosion, you lose your baseline for what is acceptable. You become conditioned to accept unacceptable behavior under the guise of family duty. I was caught in the hope trap. I kept thinking that if I just drew the boundary clearly enough, she would eventually respect it. I believed that underneath the arrogance, she was still a grandmother who loved her granddaughter. I rationalized her cruelty as misguided concern. That is the insidious nature of emotional abuse within families. The abuser normalizes their disrespect so thoroughly that the victim feels guilty for reacting to it. I was functioning as the silent investor in a toxic family dynamic, footing the emotional bill while she bankrupted my peace of mind. I thought maintaining the peace was the responsible thing to do. I didn't realize that by keeping the door cracked open for her, I was inviting a predator into my home. Every time she rolled her eyes at Maya's rescue inhaler, I let it slide. Every time she called me a hysterical mother, I bit my tongue. I was treating a fundamental lack of respect like a quirky personality flaw. It was a costly accounting error. The cost wasn't measured in dollars, but in the safety of my child. I had confused guilt with love and obligation with loyalty. I thought I was protecting the family structure, but I was really just providing a staging ground for her ultimate test. She wasn't ignoring my boundaries out of ignorance. She was studying them, looking for the perfect moment to break them down and prove her dangerous theories right. I realize now that my silence wasn't keeping the peace, it was giving her permission. I had been paying the premium on a subscription to her narcissism. When she arrived at Maya's birthday party in our suburban Illinois home, carrying an antique musical jewelry box, I didn't see a threat. I inspected the outside. I smelled nothing. I let my guard down because I wanted to believe, just for one afternoon, that she could be a normal grandmother. But Brenda didn't do normal. She did calculated. The hospital emergency room was a blinding blur of fluorescent lights and shouting monitors. But inside my head, everything was absolutely silent. I watched a team of nurses swarm my daughter, forcing oxygen into her seizing lungs. My husband, Grant, was pacing the hallway, his face pale, hands trembling as he spoke to the charge nurse. I didn't cry. I didn't drop to my knees and beg the universe for mercy. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon the panic a mother is supposed to feel, but there was only cold, razor-sharp clarity. This wasn't a tragic medical accident. This was a crime scene. I pulled out my phone and walked down the sterile corridor, stepping away from the chaos. I didn't call family members for support. I dialed two numbers. The first was the local police department in Naperville to report an intentional poisoning. The second was Naomi Park, a ruthless family attorney we had on retainer, who understood that this was an emergency requiring immediate intervention. When Naomi answered, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I told her exactly what happened. I told her my mother had handed my daughter an antique box laced with a concentrated, highly toxic essential oil blend, knowing it would trigger a severe asthmatic response. I needed a legal fortress, and I needed it built before sunrise. While Grant stayed by Maya's side, I sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area and opened my laptop. I wasn't mourning, I was auditing. I began compiling the receipts. I pulled up every medical bill from Dr. Ruiz over the past 3 years. Tens of thousands of dollars spent keeping my daughter's airways open. Then, I cross-referenced them with 18 months of text messages from Brenda. Texts where she mocked the treatments, texts where she explicitly acknowledged my strict rules against fragrances, diffusers, and oils around Maya, and proudly stated she disagreed with them. This was no longer a family drama. It was a breach of contract, a violation of the most fundamental terms of trust. I downloaded every digital interaction, creating a timeline of premeditation. Brenda thought she was dealing with a submissive daughter who would sweep this under the rug to avoid a scene. She didn't realize I had closed my emotional accounts with her the second Maya hit the floor. By the time Grant came out to tell me Maya was finally stabilized and breathing on her own, I had a 50-page digital dossier ready for Naomi and the police. Grant looked at my screen, his eyes red and exhausted. He asked what I was doing. I didn't look up as I hit send on an email to the detectives. I told him I was balancing the ledger. Brenda wanted to play doctor with our daughter's life. Now, she was going to pay the malpractice premium. I packed up my laptop. The tears would have to wait. I had a business to dismantle. The shift in my husband's eyes was immediate. Grant had always been the peacemaker, the one who urged me to nod and smile at Brenda's lectures. But seeing the clinical precision of my preparation, his hesitation evaporated. He didn't argue, he just nodded. We were no longer relatives dealing with a difficult grandmother. We were two parents preparing to execute a total legal annihilation. Brenda didn't rush to the hospital. She didn't call to ask if her granddaughter was alive. Instead, she retreated to the one place she still had absolute authority. The internet. While my daughter was hooked up to monitors, my mother was busy curating her digital mask. Naomi had instructed me to monitor Brenda's online activity without engaging. What I found was a masterclass in narcissistic spin. Within hours of the incident, Brenda went live in her private holistic wellness group. She sat in front of a ring light, looking composed and deeply troubled, playing the role of the persecuted visionary perfectly. She told her thousands of followers that her granddaughter had experienced a minor breathing hiccup because she had been raised in a sterile, chemical-dependent bubble. She claimed the antique box contained nothing more than a therapeutic, natural essence meant to strengthen the lungs. According to Brenda, the real danger wasn't the oil. It was me. She framed me as a hysterical, crunchy mom gone wrong, an overbearing tyrant who had conditioned her child to panic at the scent of nature. This is what happens when we let fear dictate health, Brenda told her audience, her voice dripping with fake pity. My daughter has made that poor girl so dependent on big pharma that her body literally rejects natural healing. I was just trying to show them the truth. It was infuriatingly calculated. She was weaponizing her audience, insulating herself with a legion of sycophants who praised her bravery, but her manipulation didn't stop at her followers. She actually had the audacity to target my husband. At 2 a.m, Grant's phone buzzed. It was a long, winding text message from Brenda. She didn't ask about Maya. Instead, she tried to drive a wedge between us. She told Grant that he needed to step up and be the man of the house, that my mental health was clearly unraveling, and that I was projecting my own anxiety onto Maya. She suggested that I had staged the severity of the attack just to punish her for disagreeing with me. She was trying to gaslight him, hoping to find a vulnerability in his exhaustion. She thought Grant would cave, that he would try to calm me down and sweep the whole thing away to avoid public embarrassment. She vastly underestimated him. Grant didn't reply to the message. He didn't try to reason with her. He simply took a screenshot of the text, emailed it to Naomi to add to our growing file of evidence, and then blocked her number. Brenda thought she was controlling the narrative. She thought her digital echo chamber would protect her from real-world consequences. But every post she made, every lie she spun, and every text she sent wasn't building a defense. It was just providing us with more ammunition. We weren't going to fight her in the comment section. We were going to dismantle her reality in a court of law. Her public sanity act was just a confession in disguise. She wanted to portray herself as a misunderstood healer persecuted by a paranoid daughter. She thought that if she yelled her lies loudly enough, they would drown out the sirens of the ambulance she had caused. I didn't feel a shred of outrage reading her posts. I just felt a cold, satisfying certainty. Let her talk, I thought. Every word she types is a nail in her own coffin. The following morning, the emotional ties to my mother were completely severed, replaced by a wall of litigation. Naomi Park didn't deal in feelings. She dealt in leverage. Under her direction, we implemented a draconian no-contact policy. Every channel of communication was shut down. No calls, no texts, no third-party mediators. If Brenda wanted to speak to us, she would have to route it through a legal representative. We weren't just reacting. We were constructing an impenetrable legal armor. Naomi began drafting an emergency protective order. But to ensure a judge would grant it without hesitation, we needed airtight proof of malice. Brenda's text messages and online rants established her motive, but we needed the physical proof of the act itself. That proof came from Melissa, our next-door neighbor. Melissa had been at the party, standing near the doorway with a video camera she used to film her own kids. Melissa had been recording the party festivities on a tripod-mounted camera, which happened to be positioned in the corner of the room, providing a clear, continuous line of sight to the gift table. I called her at 7 in the morning and asked her to check her footage. By 8, the files were sitting in my inbox. I opened the video files while sitting at the hospital cafeteria table. The quality was pristine. The camera had captured the exact moment. Maya opened the antique wooden box. It caught the immediate, violent reaction of my daughter gasping for air. But more importantly, it captured what happened next. While Grant and I were on the floor desperately trying to administer the rescue inhaler to our suffocating child, the camera remained fixed on the table. It showed Brenda. She didn't rush forward to help. She didn't look panicked. Instead, she calmly reached into her purse, pulled out a stack of tissues, and began frantically wiping the inside of the jewelry box. She was trying to scrub the concentrated oil from the hidden compartment. She was destroying evidence while her granddaughter was turning blue 10 feet away. I watched the footage 3 times. There was no motherly warmth left in me to break, just a cold, calculating satisfaction. The video clearly showed her shouting that it was nothing and that we were overreacting, while simultaneously scrubbing the velvet lining like a criminal bleaching a crime scene. I forwarded the high-definition video directly to Naomi and the lead detective assigned to the case. This wasn't just medical negligence anymore, it was tampering with evidence and child endangerment. The video transformed Brenda's defense from a difference of opinion into a documented cover-up. Naomi called me 10 minutes later. Her voice was pure steel. "We have her," she said simply. The emergency injunction would be filed by noon. Brenda had spent her entire life deciding which version of the truth the world got to see. She had controlled the family through volume and intimidation. But video files don't blink, and legal filings don't care about your tone of voice. We were stripping away her ability to narrate the situation. From this moment on, the only language she would hear from me was the language of the law. The preparation was clinical. I was functioning like an executive, liquidating a toxic asset. I didn't feel the need to scream at her or demand an apology. Apologies are for mistakes. You don't ask for an apology from someone who intentionally poisons your child. You ask for a conviction. We had built a cage of undeniable facts, and Brenda was about to walk right into it, completely blind to the fact that her reign of terror was officially over. The final nail in Brenda's coffin didn't come from a dramatic confrontation. It arrived quietly, attached to a document from the police crime lab. The detectives had confiscated the antique box and the saturated tissues Brenda had thrown in the trash. When the chemical analysis came back, it shifted the entire paradigm of the investigation. The hospital's emergency toxicological screening identified the substance within hours, and my attorney shared these preliminary findings with the police. Coupled with the neighbor's video evidence, the authorities had enough probable cause to issue an immediate warrant for her arrest. The detectives upgraded the charges immediately. It wasn't just reckless endangerment anymore. They were looking at federal fraud, distributing banned substances, and aggravated assault. The business she had used to belittle my career for years was about to be seized and dismantled by the authorities. I looked at the lab report, feeling nothing but a profound, icy detachment. My detachment wasn't a lack of love. It was the only way I could stay functional for Maya. Underneath that cold exterior, I was terrified, but I had to trade my tears for tactical precision to ensure my daughter's safety. The woman who had given birth to me was effectively dead. In her place was just a liability that I had successfully neutralized. She had spent 18 months trying to convince the world that I was a crazy, overprotective mother keeping my child in a bubble. But the data didn't lie. The receipts were pulled, the balance was struck, Brenda's entire identity was bankrupt, and the state was about to collect on her debts. She had built a life on the premise that parents didn't know what was best for their own children. She thought she was the ultimate authority, untouchable in her arrogance, but arrogance is a poor substitute for legal compliance. When the police secured the warrant to raid her inventory warehouse based on the lab results, I didn't feel a shred of pity. She had spent her life writing checks, her ego couldn't cash, and now the accounts were frozen. Her fraudulent empire was over. The climax of this war didn't happen in a shouting match. It happened in the quiet, sterile consultation room of the hospital, exactly 3 hours after Maya had collapsed. Grant and I walked in alongside 2 police officers and Naomi. She hadn't fled because she was deeply embedded in her own delusion, waiting for us to thank her for her remedy once the hiccup passed. She was arrogant enough to believe she still held the moral high ground. She was sitting at the far end of the table, her purse clutched in her lap. She looked irritated, deeply inconvenienced by the delay. She fully expected me to walk in and apologize for making a scene. When she saw the officers, she leaned toward me and whispered that I was taking this too far. Grant placed the hospital emergency report on the table. Next to it, Naomi laid down a copy of the lab results and the printed screenshots of Brenda's wellness group posts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show an ounce of emotion. I looked her dead in the eye and replied that no, she was the one who went too far. The lead detective didn't ask her about her wellness theories. He didn't care about her opinions on my parenting. He read her Miranda rights and placed her under arrest for child endangerment, evidence tampering, and the distribution of banned toxic substances. The transformation was instantaneous. The arrogant, untouchable influencer vanished. The illusion of her power evaporated the second the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She didn't ask about Maya. She didn't apologize for almost killing her granddaughter. She just panicked about her reputation, begging Grant to tell the officers it was a misunderstanding, terrified of what her followers would think if they saw her being escorted out by the police. We didn't answer her. We just watched in complete silence as the officers led her away. The audit was complete. The account was closed. In the weeks that followed, the protective order was made permanent. Brenda's business was dismantled by federal regulators. With their assistance, we initiated an emergency injunction that led to a formal investigation of her warehouse, which resulted in the permanent suspension of her operations within a month. And she faced years of litigation and potential prison time. Maya slowly recovered, learning in therapy that her fear was not a weakness, but a vital instinct that kept her safe. I look back on those 18 months of enduring Brenda's toxicity, and I realize how deeply conditioned we are to accept abuse just because it shares our DNA. I know there are people watching this who are sitting exactly where I was. People who swallow the disrespect, who endure the passive-aggressive comments, who let their boundaries be trampled because they don't want to cause a fracture in the family. I want to speak directly to you. I've come to realize that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But more importantly, setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. What people often misunderstand is the belief that cutting ties with toxic relatives makes you the villain. The truth is, blood does not grant anyone a free pass to endanger your peace or your family. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep your relatives warm. You do not have to be the silent investor in a relationship that constantly drains you. You have the right to close the account. Real family is built on respect, accountability, and the absolute protection of your boundaries. When you finally stop rationalizing the abuse, when you finally look at the facts instead of the feelings, you realize that stepping away isn't an ending. It's a rescue mission. I didn't destroy my mother's life. I simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. And the moment I did, my daughter and I finally had room to breathe. If you've ever had to set a boundary with someone who couldn't respect it, share your story in the comments. We read every one of them. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice.